When everything becomes so cheap that being cheap is all that matters, in the end, no one truly wins. For decades, China's rise seemed unstoppable, becoming the world's factory, thanks to an operating model so efficient it was almost ruthless, bordering on an art form. Cities that never sleep. Production lines lit up through the night. Prices falling year after year, like a clock programmed to run. Western competitors gradually gave up, unable to compete. It was the result of massive scale, discipline and planning, of a civilization that could turn labor into economic power. But every miracle comes with a price. China's greatest strength, the ability to make everything cheaper, faster, and on a larger scale, has now become the very force that is shaking the country, held back by its own success. China's story mirrors the story of modern capitalism, when pushed to its limits, a system that rewards growth at any cost, even if that cost harms the future. It depends on what happens when the world's largest economy is optimized to exhaustion, when efficiency is no longer a strength, but a form of self-destruction. To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning of China's miracle, the Chinese economy. In 1970, Deng Xiaoping stood before the Communist Party and broke one of socialism's deepest taboos. He declared to the nation that getting rich is not shameful, but a patriotic act. And from that moment, he opened one of the fastest economic transformations, almost overnight. Farmers became entrepreneurs. Rural areas turned into vast industrial investors. First from Japan, then the US, and later Europe. Saw a goldmine of cheap labor, an almost endless workforce, and a government ready to open doors and sign any deal. China began opening special economic zones, small pilot cities where all regulations were different. No more centralized control, no cumbersome bureaucracy, and no ideological purity tests, with one sole goal: to attract capital and generate exports. It worked beyond expectations. Shenzhen, once a small fishing town of around 30,000 people, suddenly exploded into a megacity. Millions of people. And in just 2 decades, the model spread across the entire country. Every province wanted its own breakthrough. Every city wanted to become the next Shenzhen. Local governments borrowed money and rushed to build everywhere, from highways, power plants to industrial parks, all to attract more factories. By the early 2000s, China was not just growing, it was almost consuming the world's demand for everything from steel to coal and oil. Almost every Western company that wanted to survive had to move its production lines to China. Anything that could be manufactured, sooner or later would carry a Made in China label, but beneath this seemingly unstoppable lurks a dangerous dynamic. To be considered successful, you must be cheaper than everyone else. Local governments compete to attract factories by lowering land prices, cutting taxes, and even reducing workers' wages. Cutting taxes and even lowering workers' wages. Companies competed by slashing profit margins, cutting quality, and even accepting lower profits for themselves. Everyone rushed into the growth race, but no one thought about sustainability. It was a race to the bottom, disguised as progress. For a while, it seemed not to matter. The machine was too powerful. Millions of rural workers flooded in every year, willing to work 12 hours a day for a fraction of what Western workers earned. Factories never stopped. Shipping ports never slept. Western consumers got what they considered miracles: a $5 t-shirt, a $300 iPhone, the feeling of wealth without inflation. And China grew rich from it. But somewhere between malls and the 100th steel factory, the system began overheating. The miracle gradually turned into a growth addiction. Local governments had to maintain growth just to pay back loans. They had taken out to build more factories, so they built even more. By 2015, China's steel production capacity alone exceeded the total capacity of the rest of the world. Gigantic industrial zones kept producing, far outpacing global demand. Prices started falling, not due to innovation, but desperation. When profits vanished, factories didn't slow down. They hoping higher output would make up for losses. But it didn't. That's when a new concept began spreading, borrowed from human life, but now used to describe economics: evolution. Evolution is not just about humans working more to get less in return. It also describes companies producing more, but earning less, when competition is no longer about innovation, but about survival. Evolution used to describe students or Chinese workers pushing themselves to exhaustion, even as rewards dwindled. But now, it's an industrial and systemic phenomenon. Entire sectors, giant industries, get caught in a market share war. Win or lose, where the only weapon left is solar panels, electric car batteries, energy storage cells. Icons of China's new economy have become battlegrounds of fierce competition. Dozens of companies, many state-backed, flood the market with nearly identical products, continuously undercutting each other to win contracts. Profit margins vanish, but no company dares stop. In a system where output equals prestige, reducing production means losing face. So the cycle sustains itself. Companies cut prices to hold market share. Competitors immediately follow suit. Profits collapse, wages stagnate. Consumers cheer for a while, as goods are cheaper than ever, until they realize the excess comes at the cost of their own prosperity. China had entered industrial-scale evolution, a self-destructive spiral where efficiency devours profits and output devours was no longer about innovation, but about seeing who hits the bottom last. And like any race to the bottom, no one truly wins. No one truly wins. That's why China's solar panels are now sold below cost, and electric cars pile up in lots with no buyers. It's also why tech conglomerates fight over a shrinking domestic market, even as their market value plunges. And that's why even with record exports, China's industrial profits in 2024 still fell by more than 20%. When everyone rushes to become the cheapest, price is the only thing that can keep falling. This isn't capitalism at full throttle. It's capitalism eating itself. Ironically, China has seen this before. In the 2000s, overproduction in coal and steel sent prices to rock bottom. Beijing had to intervene heavily, shutting mines and factories, laying off hundreds of thousands. It was an economic lifeline, accepting short-term pain to avoid total collapse. 2 decades later, it repeated itself. Only this time, the patient was no longer a single industry. The problem was the entire growth model. Factories in China don't close just because the spreadsheets say they should. They close only when politics allows it. And in China, politics never encourages contraction or cuts. What is encouraged is motion, even if it's just running in meaningless circles. Behind closed doors, officials clearly see the numbers: falling profits, stagnant wages, and rising debt. But publicly, the message is always the same. Keep producing, keep growing, keep believing. Because if the machine stops, the illusion of stability and prosperity collapses too. By the 2020s, China's efficient machines had become something entirely different, an economy trapped in a race with itself. From the outside, China still looks like a brilliant success story. The world sees new export records, shiny new factories, and electric cars with solar panels, in quantities enough to power a continent. But inside, profit margins are collapsing daily. The economic miracle no longer creates wealth. It just circulates it faster, thinner each year. Economists call this overcapacity, but in China it's not a mistake, it's policy. Look at solar energy. In 2023 alone, China produced more solar panels than twice the world's total demand. Prices fell nearly 40% in 1 year, forcing many companies to sell below cost just to clear inventory. Dozens of small firms went bankrupt, but large corporations kept producing because local governments needed reportable output and the illusion that everything was still progressing. Now look at electric vehicles. Over 100 Chinese EV brands for the same shrinking domestic market. Every company has to cut prices to survive, forcing competitors to follow. The state provides subsidies to prevent mass layoffs. But subsidies just feed the same old cycle. More supply, further falling prices, and profit margins dangerously thin. But the subsidies continue to feed the old cycle, increasing supply, while prices fall further and profit margins become dangerously thin. You can see where this leads. In the first half of 2020, China's industrial profits fell by more than 20%, even as exports remained high. Factories produced more goods than ever, but earned less per product. The national economy still recorded growth, but the quality of that growth is rotting from within, inside. And surprisingly, not all of this is a mistake. Part of it is intentional. The Chinese government has long mastered how to use it effectively as a weapon by pumping in subsidies to sustain key industries long enough to crush all competitors. The goal is no longer quarterly profit, but strategic monopolies. In industries like solar panels, battery storage, and electric vehicles, Beijing is willing to accept short-term losses because what they want is control over the future. Local governments pour billions into factories, offering cheap loans and tax breaks. So companies can sell below cost, not to survive but to eliminate competitors. Their logic is ruthless. Flood the market, undercut everyone, and wait. Western rivals, bound by short-term profit pressures, and private shareholders, cannot keep up. Eventually, they are forced out. Once the global supply chain depends on Chinese production, they can do what all monopolies do: raise prices, set terms, and control the entire value chain. This strategy is not new. China used it before with steel, rare earths, and shipbuilding. In each case, they cut prices until the rest of the world had no choice but to rely on them. This time, the scale is bigger than ever. These are no longer old industrial goods, but the materials of the future: lithium batteries, solar panels, electric motors, the lifeblood of the 21st century economy. In theory, it's a brilliant strategy, but in reality, it is extremely fragile. No empire can sustain losses forever, even for strategic goals, without the entire system beginning to rot from within. When all industries rely on the government to absorb losses, efficiency turns into an addiction. Firms stop competing with innovation and start competing for subsidies. Productivity is no longer an economic issue, but a political one. The line between national strategy and national burden begins to blur. That is the real danger behind China's price wars. They are not just economic battles, but fiscal time bombs waiting to explode. Every yuan spent to keep factories running today is effectively borrowed from tomorrow's stability. Eventually, someone will pay the price. And this is why the current China trap is so tragic. A strategy that once helped China conquer global markets now threatens to collapse its own economy from within. A dominance model built on losses is not victory, but delayed collapse. What causes an empire to decay is not declining demand, but the collapse of purpose. Here, purpose has been replaced by a system that cannot slow down, because every layer depends on continuous motion. Local governments need factories to keep operating, to generate revenue to pay debt. State-owned banks need these factories to continue borrowing so their books still look healthy. And the central government needs them all running to maintain the illusion of full employment. If just one link in the chain stops, everything else begins to crumble. So everyone continues to pretend that more output means prosperity, even when that is no longer true. This is the political logic of the model. State capitalism. State production is proof of control. When growth slows, the state does not shrink. It builds more factories. When prices fall, it cuts them further. When the private sector hesitates, local authorities immediately inject more credit. The solution to every imbalance is to create more imbalance. This sounds irrational, but it is how the system survives. China's economy is not just a wealth-generating machine. It is also a legitimacy-generating machine. Their social contract has one rule: as long as growth continues, people will continue to trust the system. This worked when growth raised incomes, but it no longer holds when growth only produces cheaper goods instead of better lives. The paradox is bitter. China's overproduction keeps global inflation low, but suppresses domestic wages and demand. A country that lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty now struggles to raise living standards for the very people it helped. And the more it exports its deflation to the world, the more fragile the global system becomes. In the West, cheap goods from China were once seen as a gift, keeping inflation low, stocking shelves, and making life easier for the middle class. That abundance exports weakness to the world. Western factories, emerging economies cannot build their own industries. And the real cost of global cheapness is stagnation. This trap was not created by China. History created it. The model is as old as empires themselves. Your coal industry once flooded global markets. Prices fell so low even miners could not survive. And what was the solution then? Colonies, controlled markets, to absorb surplus production. Japan's miraculous economy in the 80s hit a similar wall. Excess capacity, deflation, and an aging population unwilling to spend. Rome's decline did not start with an invasion. It began with overproduction. Large farms using slave labor produced too much food, driving prices down and bankrupting small farmers. The backbone of the Republic. Rome caused its own imbalance. Every empire that reaches maximum efficiency faces the same challenge. Can it stop optimizing long enough to survive? Chinese leaders understand this. That is why they constantly emphasize rebalancing, shifting from investment-driven growth to consumption-driven growth. But rebalancing takes time, and time is exactly what a growth-addicted system does not have. So while Beijing tries to innovation and consumption, provinces keep building more factories, more infrastructure, more output, because that is what the system incentivizes. It's like trying to lose weight, while the kitchen keeps cooking more food. A cruel irony. Toward innovation and consumption, provinces keep building more factories, more infrastructure, more output, because that is what the system incentivizes them to do. It's like trying to lose weight, while the kitchen keeps cooking more food. A cruel irony. Many of China's most overproduced goods, like solar panels, batteries, or electric vehicles, are exactly what the world needs for the energy transition. But when prices crash and companies go bankrupt, even the green revolution can stall. The rest of the world benefits from cheaper technology, but the cost is the profit of Chinese companies themselves. That cheap surplus becomes a trap, not because it doesn't create wealth, but because it removes the incentive to create new value. And when that happens, efficiency, once a strength, becomes a disease. China's problem is not a lack of productivity, but too much productivity, beyond the system's ability to self-balance. It is an empire that has reached the peak of production, but lost balance. A system that can flood the world with goods cannot create enough demand to make it profitable. There is an irony, bitter, within that paradox. The very competition that made China rich now ensures no one rests long enough to sustain that wealth. This is what happens when growth becomes identity, when production replaces purpose, and when the measure of progress is only how cheaply you can make something, even if nobody needs it anymore. That is not development. It is industrial-scale evolution. And like every empire in history, China is realizing that nothing is more costly than becoming too cheap. When a system optimizes everything, except balance, in the end, the only thing left to destroy is itself. If this content gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. Thank you very much.